Hello, everyone. Welcome to this informational session about the Arts Midwest Gig Fund. First things first, we are recording this session for anyone that couldn't attend live, and we will be posting the recording on the Arts Midwest YouTube channel, as well as on the Gig Fund program pages on the Arts Midwest website once we've had a chance to make a few polishing edits. My name is Joshua Feist. I'm the Director of Grant Making at Arts Midwest, and I'm joined by my colleague and grant specialist, Ellen DeYoung.
Hi, everyone.
Here's an agenda of what we will be covering today. And we are going to walk through the parameters of this program, explaining what you'll need to consider as you craft your application, who's eligible, what expenses are eligible, and the application process itself. We will allow questions at the end of the presentation and try to address them at that time to the best of our ability. If you don't get your question answered live, we'll follow up with you afterwards and try to get you a definitive answer. Also, you're welcome to contact us, and we will throw our contact information up at the end as well. You can submit a question at any time using the Q&A toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Before we dive in, I'd like to take a moment and lay some of the groundwork for this opportunity and the thinking and research that went into its development. So as we all know, the past year has been a struggle for the arts and touring industry due to the pandemic, as well as some of the disparities in arts funding in terms of social justice and racial equity in particular. In short, we know that times are hard right now for the arts field, and so we've taken all of that into account as we develop the Gig Fund, as well as borrowing other lessons we've learned from some of our other funding programs. Our intent is to address the current needs of the field, which we've broadly categorized into groups on the right-hand side of this slide. Organizations and artists are working hard to bring creativity to audiences in new ways through the help of technology and logistics planning. To do that, there are stages of capacity building and professional development that are necessary. At the same time, there's a moral imperative among us to act to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility in all that we do as a community of people working together in the arts. So let's get into it. What the heck is the Gig Fund anyway? I'm so glad you asked. I want to give a brief shout out to Basak Knotts from Illinois for her wonderful illustrations we're going to be using during today's presentation. Here are the basics. So this opportunity is federally funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. It is a project-based grant, which means that it's money to pay the artist or artists for their time and work, as well as other direct expenses necessary to fulfill the program requirements. There is an option for capacity building expenses for the hosting organization, and we'll provide examples of that in a bit, and which can also be found in our guidelines on the Arts Midwest website. The Gig Fund is not a relief grant, it's more of a resilience grant. Should more relief funding become available, Arts Midwest will provide updates accordingly. Now this project should gather the community safely and with accessibility in mind to engage with artists from your local community or anywhere else in the world. By safely, we mean in accordance with your local regulations about gathering recommendations issued by the CDC or state officials, since unfortunately we are still in the midst of a pandemic, though hopefully for not too much longer. Now this could mean all virtual programs, maybe a virtual component to a socially distanced in-person event, or something that is completely in-person. There is a spectrum of possibilities, and there are some good accessibility benefits of including a virtual experience, and that's why capacity building expenses such as professional development, technology licensing, or equipment purchases under $5,000 are eligible for the grant fund use. If you are familiar with Arts Midwest's funding portfolio, this newly named fund has effectively replaced the touring fund, which is sunsetting this year. However, the gig fund incorporates many of the same program parameters, but with a few changes and more flexibility with expenses, like some of that I just mentioned. We consider the gig fund an enhancement of the touring fund and hope you do too. We'll talk about some of the continuity of the program parameters from the touring fund a little bit later on. Let's back up a bit and talk about eligibility for this opportunity. As a federally funded program, this opportunity is open to 501c3 nonprofit organizations located in the Arts Midwest region, as shown on the map on the slide, which is between the Dakotas and Ohio, as well as the Native nations that share this geography. Applicants do not need to be arts-based nonprofits, but they will need to be able to host artists, pay artists, and organize the required programs. Applicants must have a federally tax-exempt status with the IRS. This opportunity is not open to organizations that need a fiscal sponsorship. Applicants also need to be in good standing with Arts Midwest with no overdue required reports or grant documents. Examples of eligible applicants may include performing arts centers located on university or high school campuses, an arts council that contracts with artists for an engagement in a community venue, a traditional theater located in the heart of a community, museums that exhibit arts and culture, a division of local government, and many other types of 501c3 nonprofit organizations. The gig fund is split into two deadlines for funding projects depending on when they will occur. Right now, we are accepting applications for projects happening from July of this year until the last day of 2021. And those applications will be due on May 3rd at 11:59 Central Time PM. And if your proposed project is happening later than that in the first half of 2022, then you'll need to wait and submit the application by November 3rd, and that application will be open after the current deadline passes. We have not opened that application for the latter deadline quite yet. You may submit for both deadlines, but if you are funded in the first deadline, then the others will be prioritized ahead of you for the second deadline. Speaking of priority, in accordance with Arts Midwest values, which center on diversity, equity, and inclusion and access, we are prioritizing requests from applicants with diverse leadership as well as applicants that are contracting with artists from diverse backgrounds in order to promote equity in arts funding. We recognize the disproportionate impact of institutional racism and historical disenfranchisement, and we seek to address that with this funding opportunity. So, in a nutshell, applications that are from organizations whose leadership falls into these categories and/or applications that intend to hire artists from these categories will be prioritized. We define leadership as individuals with decision-making power at the organization. This could mean the majority of an organization's staff leadership team, such as the executive director, and/or the majority of its board members, for example. From here, I'm going to let my colleague, Ellen DeYoung, take the presentation.
All right, so next up, I think Josh, you still have control of the PowerPoint. Perfect. What do I need to know to apply to the gig fund? We are glad you asked. So let's talk about project requirements. This funding opportunity has some project requirements for the engagements you'll be telling us about in your application. For this opportunity, we'll need to see evidence of plans for at least 2 activities that are at least 30 minutes long in whichever format makes the most sense for you. These activities need to be promoted to the general public and be accessible to attend, which means they are held in facilities that are ADA compliant, or conducted virtually with accommodations made for people with disabilities. Your activities must comply with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Americans with Disability Act of 1990, since this is a federally funded grant. At least one of these activities needs to reach an audience with limited access to the arts. So this could be one of several of the following groups of people: BIPOC, LGBTQIA, adults or youths in the justice system, economically disadvantaged or low income, adults 65 or older, or a rural community of 50,000 people or less, or people with disabilities. So some examples we've seen that would be a good fit might be a Zoom workshop led by the artist with materials distributed curbside, or maybe an outdoor concert in a parking lot, or a concert streaming online with an informal artist interview afterwards. So those are just a few examples of what the opportunity could fund. And now let's talk about the continuity with the Touring Fund. So if you've been part of the Arts Midwest Touring Fund in the last year, many aspects of this program will be familiar to you. When the pandemic hit a year ago, we started to offer more flexibility on eligible artists and programming formats. First, we dropped the requirement that artists needed to be from out of state. Artists can now be from within the local community, in addition to anywhere in the world. That will continue with the Gig Fund. And also the opportunity is now open to hosting visual artists as well as performing artists. Second, as every one of us has experienced in one way or another, programming is eligible to go virtual if in-person events are not feasible within your local area. There have been a lot of creative ways developed among artists and presenters to deliver programming in virtual formats, or something that can be delivered or experienced in a socially distanced manner. And third, grant funds are expected to cover artists' fees, but there's also the opportunity to cover other direct project expenses, and we'll talk about that a little more later on. So next up, let's discuss eligible expenses. As we mentioned, artists must be paid, that's number one. And in addition to paying your artist or artists, you can also take a portion of the grant to cover expenses like the ones you see on your screen now in order to boost your capacity for delivering programming. If you're unsure about what you could use the funds for, or if you want to run a scenario by us, please feel free to send us an email. We do require a match for this opportunity, and that can be met in a number of different ways. Since these are flat $2,500 grants, your expenses and revenues on your budget form will need to be at least $5,000 or higher. So for revenues, you'll list the Gig Fund grant at $2,500, and then you'll need to show another $2,500 in eligible revenue sources. Some examples of those additional revenue sources might be salaries and wages you'll be paying your staff, in-kind contributions, other non-federal grants you're applying for, donations, or ticket sales. If you do happen to receive other federal awards, unfortunately, you cannot match this opportunity with those federal funds. And unallowable expenses. Since this fund derives from the National Endowment for the Arts as federal funds, that comes with a few restrictions on what the grant cannot be spent on. This also applies to the match you'll need to represent on the budget. Therefore, all of the expenses listed here cannot appear anywhere on your budget. So some key examples are present on the slide now, but I'd like to call it a special distinction. If you are planning a redesign of your space and hoping to use the Gig Fund dollars for that, we cannot fund the actual expenses of the construction, but we can fund the design fees for the reconstruction. The most common unallowable expense we encounter on budgets are refreshments. So this includes amusement and social activities such as receptions, parties, galas, dinners, etc., and any associated costs, including catering, alcohol, planning, staffing, supplies. To clarify, we are not saying that you cannot have refreshments available, but they cannot show up on your budget, if that makes sense. Another call out point, cost of goods for resale are unallowable. This includes the sale of concessions, promotional merchandise, or items purchased to sell, even if it's related to your programming. However, publications such as journals or exhibit catalogs or recordings such as performance CDs that are incurred during the period of performance are allowable. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Josh for a bit.
All right, thanks, Ellen. For applicants that are thinking of adding expenses to make their engagements more accessible, Arts Midwest has a small pool of additional funds to draw from to cover those expenses. And this is money that is over and above the $2,500 grant. Unfortunately, there's not a lot to go around, but we'll try and throw in as much as we can for those that do request additional accessibility funds, which will need to be matched, by the way. A good ballpark range for this would be to request something in the realm of $200 to $300 or less. So if you're looking for some of this extra money when you're working on your budget, you'll outline how you're going to use the base $2,500 and then include the extra expenses for accessibility. So say you want to hire an ASL interpreter or sign up for a closed captioning service for a virtual presentation, and that costs $200, for example. So whereas your normal total expenses and matching funds would be around $5K, your new total expenses would be around $5,400 to represent this extra money in the match. So I know that's a lot. If it doesn't quite make sense, I encourage you to check out the example budget on the Arts Midwest website. We do have that wrapped in with the templates that we offer for the application, or send us a message and we can help you out with your budget. All right, so let's talk about receiving those funds. Now, payments are split into two halves and dispersed according to the parameters that you can see on your screen now. If you need an advance payment to cover expenses, we can issue a one-time disbursement of up to 50% of your total award early once you've signed your grant agreement, rather than waiting until your program events are about to take place. And just a friendly reminder that artists must be paid in actual cash, whether it's from the grant or the matching source. All right, so let's get into the application process. How does one apply for the Gig Fund? All right, so we encourage you to visit the Arts Midwest webpage and have a read through of the guidelines. As I mentioned just a moment ago, we do have templates, including a sample budget that you can use and upload directly into the application form. We wanted to make it so that you could work on them offline in a team if needed. And the deadline, again, for the current open opportunity for projects between July of this year and the end of December of this year is May 3rd at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. If you wish to save and return to finish your application later, you do have the option to do that, though we are recommending doing it all at once, and the templates definitely help with that. After the deadline, it will be reviewed with the prioritization mentioned earlier factored in, and then notification will take place in the early part of June. If you've received a grant from our touring fund opportunity in the past, then the final report will seem very similar to you. In a nutshell, we'll be asking for the information on your screen now. When and where did your events take place and who attended? If it was virtual, what was the address of the hosting organization? Virtual events may be difficult to gather adult versus youth statistics, so we'll just ask for the number of unique visitors to your content as you are best able to grab that information. We will need a final budget of your actual expenses with a reflection of the artist being paid. And there is also a few narrative questions about the overall impact, the feedback you may have gotten from some of the audience members, and how the Gig Fund helped you complete your work and your mission of your organization. Also, we would greatly appreciate photos from the activities that you put on. These are not required. In general, though, we'd like to encourage grantees of this program, and all Arts Midwest grants for that matter, to stay in touch with us via social media so we can help spread the word about your projects in real time. You'll have about 30 days after your last event to complete this reporting, and then we'll be able to release the other half of your award at that time. As with the application, if you need to save parts of your final report and finish it later, there is a mechanism to do that. All right, so now we'll pause for some questions that have come through. And I've marked a few that came in through the Q&A, and we'll try and do our best to answer them all live. And Ellen, since I've been yakking, is there any questions that stand out in your window?
Yeah, so folks are looking for clarification regarding the 2 activity requirements. I'm looking at a question now. Does 2 events mean 2 separate events, or could 2 or 3 showings of 1 performance be okay? I'll address that. It can be multiple viewings of 1 performance, but do keep in mind that we require that at least one of the activities reaches or targets an underserved population. So I hope that offers some clarity.
Yeah. I'll take the next one. There's a question, if we have an event taking place in May, is there a grant program for events taking place before July of this year? And unfortunately, no. These are projects for the next fiscal year. So projects starting July 1.
And related to that, can I apply for 2 artist groups or events in round 2, or just 1 of these? We do only accept 1 application per granting period. So 1 application can be accepted for that July through December time period, as well as the next January through June of 2022. And we do anticipate continuing this, the gig fund, not the touring fund, into the following fiscal year as well.
All right, there's a question about, will projects be partially funded or for the full $2,500? It is our intent to fund the full $2,500. All right, just sifting through a few of these.
Yeah, there was a question in the chat regarding the $5,000 match requirement. Josh, I don't know if you want to address that budget question.
Let's see. Sorry, we have a lot of questions. I'm looking at multiple monitors over here, so I might get to that one. Let me grab some of the other ones that came in through the Q&A first. So would author visits be considered eligible? Yes, literary arts would also work for this program. And we are recording the webinar. We will be posting that on our YouTube channel, as well as the Arts Midwest website later this week. I've seen some questions about people asking if they need to be members of Arts Midwest in order to apply for the grant, and you do not need to be a member. You just need to be a nonprofit division of local government or from a tribal agency.
And in terms of announcements for grant awards, we anticipate that we will be able to notify grantees of the award decisions in mid-June. Unfortunately, we can't get more specific than that at this time. It depends on the board meeting schedule and the process there.
We have a question about, since this is federally funded, are there special or extra reporting requirements? And Ellen and I can both kind of answer this. So there is going to be a final report that will be available to you once you are notified. And we are trying to keep the reporting requirements as minimal as possible because we don't want to induce any further extra burden. But there will be some questions about the audience served primarily that are a direct request of the federal government. Mainly demographic information, and that is collected to the best of your ability.
It looks like we have a few questions about the 2 activity requirements. So I'll just lend a bit more clarity there, hopefully. So 2 activities that can be in person or virtual, it doesn't matter which. It can be a performance in addition to a panel discussion. That counts as 2 different ones. If it happens over multiple days, but it's the same performance live stream link, we do consider that to be 1 activity, unless it is specifically targeted to an audience such as a school group or a retirement community or something along those lines. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
All right, I have a question. It sounds like there are funds. The funds are distributed in 2 installments, one at the beginning and then one after the final report is submitted. Is it split in half of these 2 installments? So yes, the $2,500 grant is split down the middle for each of those payments. There was also a question about stating that equipment purchases need to be under $5,000 or less when the grant is $2,500. And we provided that information since that is a federal requirement. And I think, let's see, there was a question about if you're asking for a 1-to-1 match, so that a $2,500 match is required if you if you apply for the program, meaning that the total project cost is at least $5,000. That is correct.
Can funds from regional arts organizations be used in the match? Yes. Correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but that is not federal, so that would be fine. Question here, we will be hosting an outdoor dance performance in October. This performance will be part of a fundraiser for our organization. Does that make this engagement not eligible since it is tied to a fundraising event? I believe that would be ineligible. Is that correct, Josh?
Yeah, also due to the federal nature of these funds, any fundraising items or expenses can't be present in the budget. Let's see, there's a question about total awards. Given the breakdown of available money, it's probably going to be in the ballpark of 60 to 70 per opportunity. So in the 2021, it'll be in that range, and then for projects happening January through June of next year, it'll be about the same.
How are salaries and wages considered part of the matching requirement? I'm going to throw that one to you again, Josh, since you're the budget expert.
Okay. They are considered part of the match. It's just what it is. Salaries and wages are eligible matching contributions to the program. So if you're paying your staff and technical crew for, well, I know you will be, for the opportunity, that counts towards the match. So just to review, the match can be salaries and wages from the hosting organization, and any in-kind contributions also count towards the match, as well as ticket sales, donations can also be used to meet the one-to-one match of $2,500.
I see a question here regarding the engagement of professional performing artists. We are a theater company who has an acting ensemble. Would paying these actors count as engagement of professional artists? That's a tough one, and I'm going to say no. Because although we don't require the same kind of touring that we did for the touring fund, we still do require that you bring in an artist into your organization and pay that artist rather than paying someone within your organization. I don't know if I explained that very well.
Well, more questions could come in if we need to. Question, we are seeking to diversify our events by bringing together underrepresented populations in our community. Must all of our artists and performers represent underrepresented groups? No, they do not have to be from underrepresented groups, although there will be priority given to artists from underrepresented groups. You see, another question, does our organization have to be registered in the SAM database and have a DUNS number? At this time, we do require folks to have a DUNS number. That process is relatively quick and straightforward. So that is a requirement. In terms of sam.gov, at this time, it's not required for this particular opportunity. However, it would be a good idea to secure that registration so that you can be eligible for other federal granting programs with Arts Midwest and outside of Arts Midwest. That process is also free. So we do recommend doing that, even though at this time it's not required for this grant.
A question about priority for the second round of funding. So to clarify, we can apply for both rounds of funding. If we receive a grant in the first round, we will receive lower priority in the second round. The priority is really based on the demand within each state. So if you are in a state that sees high demand in the second round and you have been funded in the first round, we will give first priority to those organizations led by underrepresented groups or reaching or programming an artist that represents underrepresented groups, and also giving priority to applicants who did not receive a grant in the first round. So that's kind of a complicated question, and it depends on each state's demand for the award.
I have a question about accessibility. Can you speak a bit about accessibility and the standards that might be used in looking at an event? Arts Midwest has an accessibility center, which I'll post in the chat. If I can bring that window up again. But if you Google Arts Midwest Accessibility Center, there are some federal accessibility laws that need to be complied with for events. And it's in Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. Those have the parameters of recommended accessibility. So making sure your events are open to people with disabilities, such as folks in a wheelchair. They would need to be able to access the venue in some way, wherever that venue may be. All right, just sifting through a few more here. Money from your own organization can be used as a match. Hard cash is definitely a match option.
Can funds be used for permanent equipment such as cameras that would stay at a school for a photography project? Yes, it can. Do you have anything to add to that, Josh? I think the answer is yes.
Funding for photography equipment?
Yes, for permanent photography equipment.
Yeah, that would work as long as the total cost of all the photography equipment is under 5,000, which is one of those federal regulations we need to abide by. For a class program, can we request participants pay a fee to attend and use this as our match? Yes, you may do that. Let's see.
Another question I'll throw to you, Josh. If you are purchasing accessibility resources for a full season, are you open to, and how would you recommend breaking that down to support an individual project that is part of that wider season effort?
This might require a further offline conversation, but my initial thought off the top of my head would be that there's a percentage of that total season allocation reflected in your budget in your application, but we can talk more offline about that. Circling back to another question, author presentations are eligible for this opportunity.
Question about eligibility here. The public library where I work wants to apply for this grant, but we are a 509A1 organization. We are tax exempt and eligible for other NEA grants. Yes, you would be eligible. We do allow other non-501c3 nonprofits to come in with applications. That includes universities, cities, anything along those lines. So question regarding the timeline. So if an event spans between November to February of 2022, is it fine to apply for just the first one? Yes, we would consider the start date to be within the fall timeframe. So we would still ask that you apply to the first deadline.
And I had some questions about where to find the information on the Arts Midwest website. So I posted the accessibility resources link I mentioned earlier, as well as the program guidelines that walk you through the application process in the chat. So hopefully that answers a couple questions there. Scrolling through more questions.
Yeah, so I see a few about multiple artists. Would a concert series work with multiple, would a concert series with multiple artists work for this grant? Yes. If you're familiar with the Touring Fund, you may know that we wanted to focus specifically on one artist. For this, since it's more of a project grant, and multiple artists will be allowed, since that is some of the direct expenses for your project.
And there's a question about, we are a presenting organization and we usually offer our programming free of charge. Is earned income a necessity? No, you do not need to have earned income to reflect on your budget to apply for this program.
When are reports due? So your final report due date will be based on when your activities take place. So the final report will be due approximately 30 days after your final activity.
Are in-kind expenses eligible for the match, i.e. e.g. lodging for performers and volunteers to put on the program? Yes, those in-kind expenses are eligible for the match. Another question, do we need to show that the $2,500 for the match has been raised before receiving the first installment? No, you do not need to reflect that. Just reading through a few more here. Will the additional funds we request, sorry, I'm having trouble speaking today, to accommodate accessibility required, is that required to be matched? Let me rephrase. Will the additional funds we can request to accommodate accessibility, are those required to be matched? Yes, they are. Again, that's a federal regulation. And yes, this gig fund program will be taking the place of touring fund, but it is very similar to that, but offering a little bit more flexibility that we've opened up in the most recent round of touring fund grants.
I would like to clarify the series question. So funding a series. We cannot accept 2 applications from your organization, but if you apply with information regarding a series that features multiple artists, so that would be 1 application for the series, we will accept that, but we cannot accept, or a series, a festival, something that happens within kind of one time frame. But we cannot accept 2 applications from 1 organization for the same granting cycle.
There's a question on the requirement that artists be of high artistic merit, and this is also a federal requirement that those selected are of high artistic merit, and this is something that will be discussed in the review stage, but there's no formal definition of it per se. You mentioned emphasis on funding programs with the audience having limited access to the arts. Would this also include applications of arts in health or healthcare or public health settings? I want to say yes. As we all know, folks in those institutions, healthcare institutions, do have limited access to high quality arts programming, so those are acceptable.
So question regarding sam.gov registration. SAM.gov registration was required for the touring fund. We are not currently requiring it for the gig fund. However, we still do require a DUNS number, which is related to SAM.gov, but a little easier to get your hands on.
And if you're seeing it on the website, it might require a browser restart or refresh, but sam.gov at this time is not required.
Question regarding the match. Do we need to show that the $2,500 has been raised before receiving the first installment, or do we just show the money raised in the final budget? We won't require any kind of like mid-term reporting, so we just trust that You're working on it, and we will see evidence of that in the final report.
Other question, can the total project budget exceed $5,000 as long as we show where the revenue comes from? Yes, if you want to go above and beyond the required match, then you can reflect that in the budget if you wish.
As a performing arts group, can we apply in order to hire other artists to work with us on the project? Yes. So to clarify an earlier question, if a performing arts group applies to fund their own kind of resident artists, that would be ineligible, but it would be okay to fund a visiting artist or a series that kind of brings in outside voices.
Question, could this funding be used for public art related projects? A project we're working on later this year includes a community of artists and updating a space to be more ADA friendly for mobility. Public art projects do qualify, they are eligible. If you'd like to discuss this a little bit more with us, you can feel free to contact us.
Question regarding universities. Can we receive more than one application for a university? For example, if a performing arts center in the university and a library, for example, applies? Yes, because university systems are large and they are often in different entities, we can accept more than one application for a university system.
And a couple questions about how many grants are available and how many projects will be awarded. So we anticipate making awards between 60 and 70 per deadline. We anticipate demand will be high, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to award every single person that applies, so it will be a competitive opportunity.
What is a DUNS number, Josh?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Well, it's short for a Duns and Bradstreet number. So if you, Ellen, well, actually, Ellen, would you mind throwing the link to the website in the chat for the people?
Sure.
It's what's currently being used now by the federal government to identify where federal funding is going. So the process for that is pretty simple and straightforward and free. It'll take maybe a few hours at most, and then you'll get a unique DUNS number, which you'll provide in the application so that federal money can be tracked later on. We don't do that tracking. We're just looking for that number to comply with federal regulations.
What will be the composition of the review panel? Can you talk about that as well, Josh, how these applications will be reviewed?
Yeah, we're going to be, they're going to go through a first round of staff review, and then we're going to be working with our state partners and advisory groups to provide some recommendations on funding. And of course, they're going to be ranked in priority for those organizations that are led by historically underserved groups and those that are contracting with artists from that group as well. When you say that these activities must target the underserved, does that mean the target audience needs to be underserved or the artists need to be underserved? We are an extreme rural area, so by default, our entire area is underserved. Have a look at the guidelines. We don't require that the artist needs to be from those underserved communities, but if your application does have that, then they will be prioritized, as we mentioned earlier. And then for at least one of your activities, it needs to reach an underserved audience. So hopefully that clears that up a bit. To clarify an earlier question, if an organization is funded for the first grant period, which is open now, are they allowed to apply again in November for a new activity for 2022? Yes.
Sorry.
I'm on a roll.
Okay, go for it.
Are both application deadlines equally funded? Is it possible that all or the majority of the grant funds could be exhausted after the first deadline? We anticipate funding both deadlines to meet the demand for both deadlines. So we are making as many grants as we proportionately can to make both opportunities the same amount of awards, same distribution amongst the states.
A question here, unclear about whether a one-day event that takes place in multiple locations would satisfy the requirement for 2 or more activities. Yes, it would, especially since it's in 2 different locations. That's 2 at least activities. But to clarify, we would require that at least one of them, if not both, would reach an underrepresented audience. If our series takes place over our entire fiscal year, September to June, can we submit 2 separate applications in each granting period, splitting the artists up between those performing in 2021 and those performing in January through June of 2022? I think I may have confused folks with my answer to the series question. So I should have used the word like festival. So an entire series or season would not be eligible as an application. We would still prefer that it's just one artist with, you know, their events, their performance and activities that go along with it. But if there's some kind of festival or online virtual experience that is happening over a more extended period of time, that involves multiple artists, we would accept that. However, if it's an entire series from June through September, we would encourage you to apply just with one specific artist, particularly because the award will be $2,500 regardless, and we would like to see some specificity regarding the targeted audiences.
Question, what if you cannot locate matching funds? I think Ellen and I could definitely help you locate some matching fund resources that you might not otherwise know would qualify. So I would encourage you to contact us, and then we can work with you to see how you're able to meet the match. And again, that's either cash, earned revenue, in-kind contributions, salaries and wages, all those are eligible for the match. Question, we are worried about the capacity restrictions and local regulations regarding in-person events. If we are forced to cancel or postpone the in-person event, would we be allowed to revise the budget to produce the content online? I would encourage those who are applying with this similar sort of anxiety to think about Plan B and include that in your application. So if such a circumstance were to befall your local area, then you'll have that backup plan ready, in at least to mention in your narrative. But just to answer the question here, if you need to shift from what you would otherwise do in person to virtual, you may revise your budget to make that change. it might be a good option to consider just building in a virtual component from the start, however.
What will be required to show that the artist receives a sizable portion of their annual income from artistic activities? We don't require any information at the time of the application to show that the artist is a professional artist who receives most of their income from their artistic endeavors. However, we would appreciate getting some details about them, including their website in the narrative, just so we can see that indeed they are a professional artist. And particularly in COVID times, we realized that a lot of artists have needed to supplement their incomes in other ways. So that's a little bit of a gray area, but essentially we don't need any hard proof of their income.
Question, is there a minimum annual budget requirement to apply? No, we do not require a minimum budget in order to apply for this program.
Related to the artist question, what documentation are you looking for to show proof that artists are from underrepresented communities? Again, this is really based on what they put out about themselves publicly. So something on their website, some kind of statement. It can even be, their public Facebook page where they describe themselves and their work.
I'm going to have you help me with this one, Ellen. Can you think of anything that grantees were able to do within the touring fund that are no longer able to do in the gig fund? I think my initial instinct there is no.
I think it's probably the other way around, that we're allowing more flexibility with the gig fund than we did with the touring fund. All right, we're running out of time.
Yeah. So let's wrap up. Share my screen again. Pass the questions period. So I'm sorry if we didn't get to all the questions today. We do have an email address specific to this program. So if you still have a question we didn't get to, I apologize. We'll take questions as they come into that email address. But I do want to thank you, everyone, for joining and submitting all of your wonderful questions. This has been a personal record for me in the number of questions that I've answered during a webinar. So kudos to you for all of the creative questions. If you need help during your application, or if you have any, assistance, you want us to look at your budget or things like that, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll be around monitoring that email box. So thanks again for everyone for joining us today. We hope you found it useful and informative, and please stay in touch. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now.